What's going on, guys? Lon here from Android Authority, and the Oppo R7 has already proven to be a great premium mid-range flagship, but what does the Plus version bring to the table besides just a larger size? Well, let's find out with the Oppo R7 Plus. So as the name suggests, the R7 Plus is basically a blown up version of the smaller R7. Besides the larger size and slightly thicker profile, the R7 Plus is practically the same phone. The body is completely made of metal that rounds off around the corners and sides, and chamfered edges go around the entire front perimeter of the phone. In the hand, it feels just as solid as you would expect from a metal-clad phone, and being only 7.8mm thick gives it a very sleek look and makes it a little bit easier to handle, but don't get me wrong here, it's still a large phone. The smooth metal body also makes the phone a tad slick, and although I haven't dropped it, I don't necessarily always feel confident using the phone with one hand. Oppo, however, has done quite a few things to make one-handed use as best as possible. The bezels all around have been kept nice and tight, and the power and volume keys are conveniently located on the right and left sides, and they're placed well enough to reduce the amount of shuffling you would have to do in the hand if they were situated otherwise. Ports like the 3.5mm headphone jack and micro USB port are on the top and bottom respectively, and on the rear is the single speaker, camera, and fingerprint scanner, which we'll get into later. A notification LED light is up front next to the front-facing camera and typical proximity and ambient light sensors, but unlike the R7, you won't find any capacitive keys on the bottom. Instead, Oppo opted for on-screen keys for the R7 Plus, which again was most likely a move to help minimize the phone's footprint. The main reason for the R7 Plus's large size is due to the display. It's a 6-inch AMOLED screen made of 2.5D glass for that subtle curve along the edges, and features the same 1080p resolution as the regular R7, and it practically dominates the entire front of the phone with an almost edge-to-edge appearance. Although it may fall short by today's standards, it's a good looking screen overall. It's reasonably sharp at 367 ppi that you won't really have much of an issue with reading text or graphics, and the large size makes it a pretty awesome experience for movies and games. Since it's an AMOLED screen, you can expect deep blacks, vibrant and punchy colors, good viewing angles, and it's fairly easy to see in direct sunlight at max brightness, but definitely far from the best. The internals of the R7 Plus is identical to the R7 with a Snapdragon 615 and 3 gigs of RAM. The Snapdragon 615 has proven to be a very formidable chipset in other devices, and the story is pretty much the same here, which is only augmented further by the optimizations Oppo has made to ColorOS for faster boot times and app launching. In general, everyday use, performance has been very responsive and snappy, and 3 gigs of RAM is more than plenty for a smooth multitasking experience. Even with the somewhat heavy ColorOS skin, I haven't noticed any hiccups with anything I wanted to do, including gaming, which has been a very pleasurable experience, and just in case you're wondering, no, it does not overheat. It gets warm after long periods of heavy use, but that's very normal behavior for any smartphone. The remaining hardware on the R7 Plus includes the typical stuff like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.0, GPS, and LTE connectivity, but there's no NFC to take advantage of things like mobile payments, which may or may not be a deal breaker depending on how much you use NFC. For storage, the Oppo R7 Plus comes in a 32GB configuration, and that should still be fine for most people, but if you need more, the R7 Plus supports micro SD card expansion for up to 128 extra gigs of storage via the secondary slot on the phone's dual SIM tray. Speaker quality on the R7 Plus is nothing extraordinary. It sounds fine and gets the job done, but it's a little too quiet for my taste, and being mounted on the rear isn't the most optimal position. It's pretty easily muffled when laying on a table or other flat surfaces, and since the audio is firing away from your ears, it doesn't make for the best audio experience. Also located on the rear is the addition of a fingerprint scanner, which is probably the most notable piece of hardware on the R7 Plus. Fingerprint scanners are starting to become a very popular security measure in smartphones, so it's nice to see a company like Oppo hopping on board. The fingerprint scanner itself is a small rectangular pad that you simply just rest your finger on to unlock the phone, and in my experience, it's been just as fast, reliable, and accurate as fingerprint scanners on other devices like the Galaxy S6, One M9 Plus, and even the iPhone. Setting up the fingerprint scanner is also a very similar experience to other phones, requiring a series of repeated presses to properly capture your fingerprint. The process is quick and painless and takes maybe a minute or two at most, and additional fingerprints can be added if you desire, but once the setup process is done, you are good to go. Being mounted on the back isn't unusual by any means, but it definitely is different from the more recent implementations that we've seen. The rear placement makes sense as it's a natural resting point for your index finger, and personally I think it's much easier to reach for versus a front mounted one, but it isn't without its drawbacks. For starters, you can't unlock using your fingerprint if the phone's resting on its back, and secondly, using other fingerprints such as your thumb is completely possible but isn't necessarily comfortable. Those aren't deal breakers or anything, but just quirks to be aware of if you're used to phones with front-mounted fingerprint scanners. The battery in the R7 Plus is a very generous 4,100 mAh battery, and battery life has been extremely excellent. I can easily get through a full day, and the phone always has enough juice left over to get me through the better part of a second day before finally having to reconnect to a charger. Whether I'm playing a lot of games, catching up on YouTube, or just using the phone more casually, the R7 Plus always surpasses the 5-hour screen on time mark and sometimes gets pretty close to 6 hours. This phone is extremely hard to kill in a single day, and that's a good thing because that isn't something you can say about many modern day smartphones. When you finally do run out of battery or just need to quickly top off, the R7 Plus comes with Oppo's now tried and true VOOC rapid charging technology, a feature that has become a staple with Oppo devices, and it's an awesome feature to take advantage of on any Oppo device that supports it, but especially so on the R7 Plus due to its large battery. For the camera, the R7 Plus features a 13 megapixel camera with f2.2 aperture, laser autofocus, LED flash, and the front camera is an 8 megapixel shooter that's capable of taking some surprisingly great looking selfies if you're into that sort of thing, and should be more than good enough for other things like video chats. The camera UI is fairly simple, and switching between capturing photos and video can be done just by swiping on the viewfinder. Tapping on the icon in the upper right will reveal a bunch of shooting modes from Beautify, Ultra HD, slow shutter, live filters, GIFs, to the basic essentials like HDR and panorama. If those aren't enough, you can download extra modes under the more functions section that includes things like double exposure, super macro, and even one that allows for shooting in RAW format so you can post-process the images yourself. One feature that Oppo has been really touting with its camera is the use of an RGBW sensor, which adds a white pixel to the usual RGB setup, and this is supposed to allow for substantially better low light performance. Oppo is claiming 32% higher sensitivity to light and 78% in noise reduction. This is all just a bunch of marketing mumbo jumbo, and all that really matters is the end result, and the R7 Plus's camera definitely delivers in low light. Photos are well exposed without blowing out the highlights, and there's very little noise, and while photos do lose some sharpness in low light, there's still a surprisingly good amount of visible detail when zooming in. The only real issue in low light is the shutter speed tends to get a bit slow, making it difficult to always get a well-focused shot. In normal lighting conditions, the camera performs even better. There's plenty of detail and sharpness, colors are accurate and true to life, dynamic range is decent, and the camera experience is a lot faster in these conditions, making it a joy to use. HDR works well for the extra boost in dynamic range, but sometimes can be finicky with exposure, and some images tend to have a much warmer tone. Otherwise, the R7 Plus's camera is a very solid shooter and is probably one of the best that you'll find in the mid-range market. Software-wise, you're looking at Android 5.1.1 with Oppo's Color OS, and this is a pretty major difference from the regular R7 as of right now, which was launched with KitKat. Aesthetically, you won't really notice a difference anyways, as Color OS takes over pretty much anything and everything that you'd find in stock Lollipop. It's a very similar skin from other Chinese OEMs with an app drawerless launcher, but it's a very clean experience with nice looking icons, transparencies, and there's a good amount of color sprinkled into the elements of the OS, but it doesn't overdo it to the point where it feels intrusive. If you're familiar with Color OS, then you'll feel right at home with many of its features. There's a built-in theme engine that allows for customization of the OS if you don't like the default look or just want a change of scenery. It's a very well fleshed out theme store with plenty to pick from, so you shouldn't have any problems finding something that you'd like. Many of the screen on and screen off gestures are all still available, like double tapping the screen to wake the display, drawing an O on the screen to launch directly into the camera, or you can create your own gestures as you see fit. The screen on gestures include things like being able to take a screenshot with a 3-finger swipe, adjusting the volume with 2 fingers, swiping in from one of the 2 bottom corners to shrink the screen for easier one-handed use, and double tapping the home key to put the phone to sleep. As gimmicky as some of these features might sound, I did find quite a few of them useful and makes mundane tasks like taking a screenshot or launching the camera quicker and easier to do. The R7 Plus is expected to launch with a sub $500 price tag of around $480. Some may find it to be a little bit high in this day and age for a mid-range phone, especially when compared to a lot of the sub $300 mid-range flagships out there, but you have to keep in mind the sacrifices OEMs had to make to hit those price points. Oppo made very few sacrifices with the R7 Plus, which makes the price more justifiable. It's far from being a steal of a price like the OnePlus 2 or even the upcoming Moto X, but you certainly aren't going to feel ripped off should you decide to go with one. If you're looking for a smartphone with an all-metal build, a massive screen, and almost 2-day battery life, the R7 Plus will be an investment that you won't regret. As always guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below. We definitely appreciate it. And also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And if you want to see more here from us at Android Authority, make sure to check out the links over here on the side. And also don't forget to check out the website as well for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.